Welcome to this edition of Unhurried Conversations. We're so lucky today to have Anna Kohler Smith with us. Not only is she an entrepreneur and fellow Carbon Almanac alum, but she is also one of our advisory council members. So we're super thankful to have Anna here with us to have a bit of a different kind of conversation today. Instead of us asking Anna all kinds of questions, Anna has the floor and she's going to ask Manon and I any questions she has about our regenerative business course. So before we begin, Anna, could you please give us just a bit of a description of you and your business?
Sure. So I'm a little bit hard to categorize, I will admit. I'm actually really hard to categorize. But I do a huge number of different things. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an artist, I'm a scientist. There's a lot of different categories and buckets that I fall into, but a lot of my work focuses on predominantly on where I live, which is in the Peruvian Amazon, working in particular with indigenous communities. And I've explored all kinds of different topics and working with folks. So I have sort of braved the frontier recently of going more from scientist to entrepreneur. And I think that's been one of my biggest transitions recently. And so I'm kind of in my own space as an early stage entrepreneur, a climate activist, and as a scientist to kind of figure out how do these pieces all come together in a cool and meaningful way as an entrepreneur? Like how do we take our principles and monetize them in ways we're proud of, and actually meaningfully implement? I find that transition to be fascinating and essential and to be kind of perilous as well. But in the company of people like you, like EarthWork and, our wonderful advisory committee, like it gives a lot of legs to that process and to that learning. And so I've had really enjoyed the sort of company that we're keeping in terms of transitioning kind of different, not only different kinds of professions and buckets of work, but also kind of the way we think about it. And so I've been really excited to be taking, the small business course and to be part of EarthWork Collective, but also to kind of think about myself as an entrepreneur. And that's kind of my new newbie hat that I'm wearing. And so that's kind of the frame I would love to talk to you two about today, are the questions I have regarding that. How does one, as a new entrepreneur who also happens to be a scientist and activist, bring those kinds of pieces together via entrepreneurship in a sustainable way? What a couple of the tidbits about me: I write a really active blog. I'm a creative writer, and I kind of have. I think part of what I love about the community that we're part of is there's kind of space for all different kinds of folks with all different kinds of sort of areas of strength and interest. Again, how do we take these pieces together and kind of gobble them or club them together, into a big whole? And I think that's also the work of like some of my favorite kinds of entrepreneurs are people who can take these different pieces together and actually create something not only meaningful, but also like profitable. I think that's the question. That's a big question, right? And it's a big question, by the way, in where I live. Where I live in Peru, what we're seeing is the most profitable businesses are the illegal ones and the dangerous ones and the ones that destroy the environment. But the laws of economics apply. So how do we think about that carefully? These are the kind of questions I walk around thinking about a lot.
As do we. Those are the questions that guide
This
our
in good
work, that
company.
have guided our course, that are never ever out of our heads. Thank you so much, Anna, for that intro and for being here with us. We really appreciate this. This is a cool new way that we're hoping to be able to get your voice about your business and how the course can help you and how we can answer any questions that you have as you've been going through the course and even as an entrepreneur who's hoping to go down the regenerative path. So we'll dive right in. And if you'll hand the floor over to you and you get the interviewer microphone.
Great. Okay. So I guess to turn the light on the both of you and on EarthWork Collective. I'm curious, first of all, just kind of unscripted or just what is it that's driving you? Like where is this coming from in the spaces of you all to see this sort of transition happen?
I think for me, it's about the experience of doing and the reinforcement I get from being in relationship or in right relationship, or as much as I'm trying to be with nature and interbeing with other species than just humans. But yes, also interacting with humans, but widening that circle of respect and reciprocity has been big for me.
For me, exactly what Manon said, working to be more in right relationship and also to be a part of the solution. I see all around me the problems and it, tears at my heart and I want to do something. And so helping businesses become regenerative is the way that I can make that positive impact on the world.
So what's specific? So why business? Like there's a great nonprofit space. There's a lot that's not business. Why specifically business then?
I think we chose business because we see that a huge part of the problem is our economic system. And we can't create a new future with the same thinking that created the past, right? We have to think in a new way. And if we can change, be a part of the change of the economic model, then huge, huge things are going to happen in this world. If the capitalism, extractive capitalism is creating the problem, we're hoping that regenerative economics and regenerative business can help solve it.
And there's a lot of small businesses out there. I mean, that's where I feel like power lies for real in those numbers. And in reviving the local economies and communities, they play a vital role. And so it was important to also speak to that aspect.
We love small businesses. We believe that we want small businesses to take over. Let's, instead of people shopping at the Amazons and Walmarts, going to the corner store again that their neighbor owns, that they can have a face-to-face conversation and know the person they're giving their money to. Like, that's the world we dream of again.
And of course, we're speaking to the business owners or the entrepreneur behind the business, because you can't speak directly to a business. You're speaking to people that are behind these businesses. And it's amazing to be in relationship and communication with people who have similar values, who believe in a potentially similar way that the world could be, and to know that your money is encouraging that world. So not just as me, the educator, trying to get businesses to shift a bit the way they do things. It's also me as a consumer trying to act according to my values.
So you actually see that from both sides. You see that from the side of the business and also the side of the consumer. Interesting to think that in all this effort to work with entrepreneurs, you're also thinking it from the side of being a consumer. Because are you the person that wants to shop with these folks, right? That's the kind of places you want to also exist. Is that where you want to be a customer?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes that entails saving your money for a little bit. But it's all worth it.
Okay, so I guess then I'm wondering then about entrepreneurs, these small business entrepreneurs, and this course you've created. Okay, so if we can kind of hone in a little more specifically, what is the change you're looking for someone like me, a new entrepreneur, to make as a result of this small business course? What tools does that provide that you see as essential that are often perhaps missing or?
Our regenerative business course is based on the 8 principles of regeneration, which was developed by the Capital Institute. And these 8 principles are full of tools that can help small business owners, entrepreneurs, to become more resilient in a changing future. We know that with climate change and with all the socioeconomic problems that are happening, businesses need to be resilient. So these tools help a business to be able to tackle problems in a way that the larger companies wouldn't be able to do on the old capitalist model. For example, we talk a lot about the circular economy. So Instead of just producing waste, we find creative ways of using our waste, which not only saves money, energy, resources, time, but it also puts products with greater value into the world. We are helping to create better relationships with customers because we know that customers want products that are sustainable. They want products that are part of the circular economy. We are helping to help businesses work in right relationship with nature so that we're not just working on extracting from nature, but giving back to nature, because we know if we're continuing to extract from nature, there's going to be nothing left for the future. So in these ways, the regenerative model helps businesses to be able to stay in business, to be profitable in business, and to work in the world without leaving so much of a footprint, without extracting so much, with making things better.
Yeah, and if I can add, the course is not about a cookie cutter. Here are the steps. Those are the solutions that will fit you. It's more a laying the groundwork so that you, as a business owner, can take what clicks right now, what resonates as something that is possible to implement, and create your own version of the solution, because we know every situation is unique. In that diversity, those pre-made solutions don't quite work. So the course is built in a way that you can develop your own reflexes with these principles so that they can guide your decision making in the everyday of the business.
Yes, and along that line, it's also about taking small steps and realizing that there's no perfect way to be regenerative, but every small step we take is making things better instead of trying to be all perfect before. So the course allows the small business owner to start as small as they need to in order to be able to make the process a part of the way that they do business.
Okay, so a couple of things you mentioned in that, right? You mentioned the circular economy. You mentioned creative ways of helping people stay in business and work in the world without extracting things. So one of the things I see a lot where I live, which is has a lot really, high levels of poverty, is that we know that we need to work with a context where people have at least sort of minimal levels of needs met, right? To be able to sort of generate a business that feels like it's not at that very base level, almost race to the bottom, extractive, almost based on desperate need. And so we're talking about what kind of group of businesses. We're talking about businesses that do have a baseline level of, that are not basic, that are, I guess, what would it be? That kind of have like an infrastructure in place that's able to help them maybe with the race towards the top instead of the race towards the bottom, in terms of they're not fighting against things like poverty. They're fighting against things like, they may be fighting against poverty, but they're not within context in which people cannot count on those kinds of resources. Is that the kind of context? I'm curious to hear what kind of context of businesses you specifically mean.
The context can vary so much. I think the advantage that we have in working with small and medium-sized businesses is that they're more agile. They have it's less of a big boat to turn around when you make a decision. So respecting a fair wage for your employees is part of the process of how you set your business in motion, and is reflected in the price of your services and goods, and also communicated in a way that as a customer on the other end, you feel like you're making a decision that's part of the solution and not just encouraging the people who are putting profit over the well-being of people and the planet.
Okay, so that brings up a great question for me then. So what gets in the way with that then? Like, there are huge factors that come in between people actually having a vision of a solution. I'm going to create I say this all the time. I'm going to create a small business that's going to contribute to a solution. And then there's all of the mess that happens in life that gets in the way. I'm curious if you can describe that for us and what that's like for entrepreneurs.
I think for one thing, feeling alone and isolated is big for especially solopreneurs or people who have very small teams where, they're the owner, the boss, and they don't have a community who are working along the same lines to speak to. And so, one thing that we really want this course to be is an opportunity for people to find like-minded businesses, like-minded people, other entrepreneurs in their space, or even uh, other entrepreneurs with the same mindset who are hoping to go down this regenerative path together, because it's not something I believe that you can do alone. One of the things that we're hoping to do with the course is to have a cohort so that entrepreneurs can work together and be able to take the course together, but not only that, to be able to support each other through problems they may be having. I've been in cohorts before, we're still connected, where we can still, oh, hey, I've got this problem, can you help me out? And this is years down the road. So in our ideal situation, we want to be able to support entrepreneurs to be able to do this work.
And sometimes you're the only one in your region, but we have the magic of the virtual world now that can connect us to a bigger network that we might not have known existed before. And I felt that as being part of the Carbon Almanac. Maybe in my little community, I feel like I'm the only lone activist, but when I take a step back and I look at it, really, I'm part of this amazing global network of people who all are working towards these things like me, and that's amazing. So it brings me a sense of hope to know that network exists, and I think we can do a better job of connecting the business owners that are working in this space, because they're working in a really tough system right now. It's not easy to have values and want to do business.
But it does seem like a kind of a shared, I feel like if your shared opponent is the status quo, right? And that's kind of what you both have. You're sitting on the same bench next to somebody, like looking at the system that is extractive and really, in many, most cases, a race at the bottom. We're looking at the same. It's like the idea, I don't know, we talked so much about the Carbon Almanac and is who people like us, right? Finding those kinds of people like us. So I'm wondering if you two can share more about the people like us that, like, more some of the profile of these entrepreneurs, these people on the bench next to us. Like, what else is going on inside their heads? What are the other what else is going on for them?
I think reevaluating how we calculate value is an important question that is raised through one of the principles who says views wealth holistically. And it certainly helped me see that by slowing down parts of my life, I've been able to enjoy a much better quality of life, as opposed to racing to make more money. So there's this equilibrium that comes from seeing richness in a different perspective. I am rich in relationship. I am rich in amazing food while I tend the land. I am rich in all these other things that are not calculated when we say, oh, you're poor, right? Like, it's taking a bigger lens to see what is of value.
And another thing I think is that people who would take this course or who would want to go down the regenerative path are people who really want to do well, like they want their business to succeed, but we call doing well by doing good. So they're people who want to live their values through their business and who want to, not have that separation between this is how I am my real life, my life, and this is how I am in my business. And I have to kind of ignore the extractive, not so socially kind things that I do in my business so that I can make a profit. We're hoping people can see that we can still make a profit while doing things that help people in the planet.
So that's okay. That's a helpful point of clarification. I think part of what I'm hearing is a couple of different things, both things about what an entrepreneur might want, and things an entrepreneur might be rejecting, right? There's two kind of different sides to that. So it does sound like, at least in my own experience too, that it does require a rejection of a completely capital exclusive extractive principle, which has really ruled the day up until, very recently. Well, there's actually, different kinds of economies over time, but in our kind of mainstream concept of it. So I guess as an entrepreneur myself, something I would be looking for is someone who, like you said, who sees wealth differently, who sees wealth holistically. I generate huge value and meaning out of doing contribution that is courageous and meaningful in a unique way. That's not just because it's how business has always been done. And to me, that's also part of the profile, is being like, yeah, I guess it's part of what you're describing. There's a certain rejection of old systems, but maybe what you're saying more, if I'm hearing you right, is that there's a shared sense of specific value rather than just reacting against something else. I don't know if you two want to have any thoughts on that.
But we're definitely still in the capitalist systems, and businesses today are operating in it. So we can't fully ignore it. And I think this is a possibility of changing it from within to show that there's a slightly different way of doing things and that it works. So lots of case studies in the course of businesses that have proven that it is possible to do it. And there's examples in all kinds of different industries. In my dream, we continue doing these case studies and shining a light on, look at this set of amazing businesses in this industry that are doing great regenerative work. And you can't do it perfectly. So we have to allow for, this is a path and it's not perfect all at once. You cannot start and be perfect regenerative business. It's something that you work on constantly. And sometimes Katherine uses the example of like, you can't be Zen like all in one go. Like it's something that you practice over time. It's never really done.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, Anna, when you said that it's a rejection of the status quo, of buying into the whole, I have to have plastic packaging because that's the way it's done, or I have to be a part of this extractive capitalism because that's the way it's done. And also an acceptance of what our values. So whether we're valuing a cohesive society where inclusion and diversity is very important, and we respect nature, like those are things that we need to accept into our businesses, and they can't be separated anymore. So there is that dichotomy there. I think they're both very important.
Yeah, I think that that's sort of an interesting frame with it. I find it with my own work, kind of as an entrepreneur, there is a certain amount of courage that you get from others, right? You have to have, as you all, EarthWork is that way for me. We're the bench mates together on, in this various games that we're playing, right? I've been thinking a lot about strategy. So I guess that leads me into another thing. I mean, so where do you see the greatest need for entrepreneurs? Or unless that's something we feel like we've already discussed.
Perhaps the greatest need for entrepreneurs is to have a successful business that defines them as an entrepreneur. And I think perhaps one thing that could be holding them back, to answer one of your earlier questions, is the fear that they may not make money if they don't follow the business as usual model. And so through the course, as Manon said with the case studies, we're hoping to show that there are many, many businesses who are leaving the business as usual extractive capitalism. As much of it as possible, they're leaving it behind and adopting new ways of working that are profitable and make things better, instead of contributing to what we know is going to be, something really bad coming in the future. We I think are at an opportunity right now where we can still turn things around, and we have a boatload of case studies to show that there are businesses who also believe that and are working towards it.
I think we've heard over and over that businesses want to find their customers, like finding the customer is a challenge. Like they're working super hard at all kinds of things. They're wearing many hats. And that communication piece of being able to tell the story of what it is that you're trying to do, and maybe be honest about the areas of challenges and where you're hoping to eventually improve this thing, and not hiding it, like being okay with I'm imperfect, but I want to communicate that this is what I'm trying to do, is a good way of finding these new customers, the customers who are wanting to encourage this model. So getting business owners to like gather enough courage to tell their story out there.
And there could be a lot of fear in telling that story. It seems like I'm curious about that part. I think that comes up, at least for me. I'll just say briefly as a new entrepreneur, the idea that, you know what, the permission topic. Here I am, I'm doing this thing, I'm doing this differently. It's just new to me. I've done it differently and now I'm changing the way I've done it. What gives me the right to go out to take the next step and to move forward? I think that people run into sort of the imposter syndrome and the vulnerability and the resistance of the huge things that get in the way. Yeah, I guess I'm just appreciating kind of, and I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm curious to hear if you have a favorite case study that's been particularly helpful as sort of a guiding light in both of your work.
The one that stands out the most for me is probably Waterhall. They are a small UK company who make sunglasses and regular glass frames, and they make some other beach cleaning gear, etc., out of old fishing nets, discarded fishing nets. And so they not only clean up the beaches of discarded fishing gear, but they also turn it into very durable eyewear. And the one thing I love about their company is they've stayed small. They know that their community is what makes them successful. So they are they honor their community, which is one of the principles, and they do that one very well. They know that if they scale too much too fast, they're going to lose what makes Waterfall special. So they've tried to grow at a very consistent pace. They create products that are nice looking and durable and have solved a problem. To me, that is what I look for when I'm looking into whether I'm going to buy from a company or not. The other piece that they do, they're very transparent. So when things aren't going well, they're vocal about it. You can read on their website about things that haven't gone so well. They still manufacture offshore out of the UK, and they're hoping to bring it back to the UK, but they're just not quite there yet. But they're very honest about the fact that they're not there yet.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the most inspiring ones, and also they dream big. So I'm sure they've been dreaming big from the start, and maybe it's hard in the beginning to think that big thing that you really wanted to do is not there, and it takes many years to get there. But they have in the works to contribute to rescue missions for marine wildlife that are stuck in nets. So it's all part of this passion to save these animals at first. But when he started making these glasses, one of the co-founders wasn't actively saving physically an animal yet, but now years later they're doing it directly, like they were doing it indirectly by removing the ghost gear, but now they're supporting the efforts at sea to save these animals.
I think that's an excellent point about the successful regenerative businesses is they started with this problem they wanted to solve, like Harry Dennis at Waterhall, and they built their business slowly, and now they're able to see an impact that goes way beyond where they first started. And that seems to be an overarching theme with all of the case studies that we've encountered. They were comfortable with small incremental steps. And that's what we're hoping to show with this course, is that this is how you can build a regenerative business, small incremental steps that build up to making a big impact.
And something that they have in common is financing their businesses a little bit untraditionally. So most of them didn't say yes to big influx of capital to get things going fast and make lots of profit right now, the way the typical financial model is built right now for businesses. And that's like an emphasis on that slow approach and making sure that the decisions are reflecting your values along the way. And that takes a little bit more time.
I'd argue it also requires a huge amount more courage. Kind of at each point, you're like, I don't know, in my own experience as an entrepreneur, it's like, okay, each time I'm crossing something, I have to kind of pause and take a walk, think it through, kind of in that. Because every time it can feel like it's another scary, heavy, unknown bridge you're crossing, every single piece along the way. And so one of the things that's been the most helpful for me as an entrepreneur is to think about, well, I guess, and really in human and adult learning, right, is we think about models. We need models to have, even just to have any kind of thing plasmatize in our mind. You know, this is something that exists. This is something that's been done. And it sounds like a lot of what this course is about is showcasing. These are models. This is what this is possible. And you are in the company of others who have been successful, like almost not necessarily fear not, but we've seen it. We have evidence of it. Take a look for yourself. And as you're in that process, there are people alongside of you who are also asking the scary questions and who are been courageous in the way that you were hoping to become courageous enough to continue to do. And I think that's really often more the frame. It's not that, oh yeah, I'm doing it. You have absolutely no idea what you're doing. You have no idea. And there's a very good chance that what you're doing and the way you thought, if you're going to be agile, will change. And so I think that's the sort of thing. So I guess that's one of my next questions is, and as an entrepreneur, what's amazed me is how often I've been surprised by things along the way. So I'm curious for both of you, what's surprised you?
Well, for me in creating the course, one of the most surprising thing was the impact of these principles on my personal life. Because one of the best ways to learn something is to teach them. And as an educator, I think that's a privilege. And I try to choose my topics wisely. I think this one is amazing because it's had so much good brought back to my life and to me personally, because I think sometimes we do get out of balance and drained and rushed. And there's so many challenges in life that when you take these principles and you apply them, there's a greater chance of balance and resilience and finding hope and having the courage to continue making these steps. So I've been like lifted, supported by these principles in my personal life, not just in the business life of EarthWorks. So that's been amazing.
So I also feel that in my personal life, recognizing the places where I already have been regenerative or working towards that makes me feel good, comforting. And also the areas I still need to work on, because I know there are always areas we need to work on. And so applying the regenerative principles to my own life has been eye-opening. I think another thing that has surprised me is that it's not as widely known as it should be. It seems so common sense to me, and yet very few people, when I explain what we do, know what regeneration means, especially as it applies to business. Many people have heard about it as it applies to agriculture, but haven't heard it in a business sense or can't even see how it applies to business. So it shouldn't have been surprising to me, but as I delve deeper, it's like, why isn't this more common? Like, why isn't this more common sense? And I think the other thing is just the overwhelming positive response when I explain regenerative business and people say that is so necessary in the world right now. Like, to me, that it surprised me because I one was happily surprised that people thought of it in such a positive light. But it also surprised me that people are or hadn't thought about that there is an alternative way yet. And now they're starting to think about, the more I talk about, the more we talk about at Earthwork, the more businesses get involved, the more people are going to hear about it. I think the more it's going to catch on.
So one of the things that you mentioned was a personal level of resilience, that like by being involved with this, it's actually infiltrated your own personal life. I think that that might be almost like a secret that's kind of, certain principles in life or values, if you implement them, you're actually going to just be a happier person. Like you may not think of, I wasn't getting into becoming an entrepreneur to be happier, but as it turns out, if I'm doing things in community and courageously and with resilience, I'm going to have a better life, you know, like that's going to improve my life. And that's something I want to underline for entrepreneurs out there, kind of thinking about the course or thinking about next steps and so forth. The other thing you mentioned is that people often don't know that this kind of thing exists, that there are alternatives. This is good to know about. These things are out there. And yes, people can extend themselves in these new directions. But I guess that's kind of one thing I'm wondering too, is that this course is really more for people who have already been down that road, right? They've been down the road and they decided, yes, this is for me. We're not finding people who are at that fork and dividing, the people who are already on the path. Yes, I want to be regenerative. This right. Okay. I'm getting that. Okay.
I was going to say they might not know the word regenerative, but they definitely have a social and ecological conscience driving their actions.
Okay, so I want to turn the light again back to the two of you, and this might be a little bit more of a personal question about what's been the hardest part for both of you in this process.
I think for me, it's the balancing act of teaching these principles and these courses and trying to share the message about the impact it can have on the people in the world while building a new business, because we decided that EarthWork was not going to be a cooperative or a not-for-profit, but we decided to make it a business. And it's still shaky grounds. It's still early years. So there's like you spoke earlier of the imposter syndrome. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, what are we doing teaching business when we're trying to get this business on the road? But I just have to take deep breaths and continue. We know that this is a slow process and we're willing to be surprised. I think as EarthWork, we have changed and evolved over time, and it will still continue to be that way moving forward. But we're still finding our footing as a business.
And I think another difficult part for me has been that EarthWork is 100% virtually based. We do not have an office where people can meet in person. So for me, physicality is extremely important, and I like to be able to feel people's energy. And so the learning to work online has been a challenge, and also I think an extremely great reward for me, because I've got to meet people from around the world who have made my life so much better. So the double-edged sword, I suppose. So.
I think so much of what I noticed too at that shaky ground, right, you mentioned, is kind of, I think everyone's sort of in that boat. All these entrepreneurs in this this boat's moving all over the place. You don't really know what's going to work, what's not going to work, what's going to have to be changed. I have to say though that it's almost like no one really knows what business will ultimately work. And in my own business, right, I don't know what parts. I've already mutated it so many times, but it's the driving value at the end of the day, the vision of making the world a more regenerative place, focus on small business, but really ultimately with the idea of regeneration in mind, that actually has a lot of flexibility in it, right? If we allow ourselves. And so I guess I'm curious to hear another question for the two of you is, what would you recommend, or what are your thoughts on teams with that kind of resilience? What do you see as being the salient and most helpful characteristics for teams that are kind of able to make this transition? Or maybe you want to talk about EarthWork Collective itself and kind of those characteristics within your team.
So one of the principles is empowered participation. And what it means is that you have the authority as a person on this team, or you have the ability to make a decision and act on that decision. And the team has your back. You know, we've got trust within EarthWork that if I take on a project, I don't need to ask permission for every step along the way. My team knows that I have EarthWork's best interest at heart, and I'm going to create something that EarthWork can be proud of. So I think a team that embraces the philosophy of empowered participation will be successful at keeping a cohesive team and being able to, um, weather those small storms. You're not going to get bogged down in red tape. You're not going to have to wait all the time for someone at the top to give you permission. People are going to be able to be their full selves at work because they're not going to be constantly wondering if their boss is going to say no to them. There's that sense of trust, I think, is what makes a team able to do really incredible things.
And it's not always easy. It definitely has an aspect of being okay with being uncomfortable and sometimes not knowing and being confused. And like we all have in our interactions things that shock us or trigger us personally, having that breathing room of allowing yourself to grow in the process, like not always rushing through this conflictual time because that's the way we do things, like deep breaths. We could slow it down and figure it out, and working from the basis of trust and respect, knowing deep down that this is not about me, this is about this idea. How can I open myself to that perspective? And then being really surprised, like, oh my God, this thing might actually work, when you're not so blocked about like, no, that's not going to work because so it's this example and that example. Like sometimes we get stuck in our ways of thinking. And that's what's challenging about working with other humans. They have all these other ideas that you never thought of. So being open and curious about what that means.
One way that we found that we can help ourselves when we get into those sticky situations is through transparency. So we always do a project review where the whole team gets to say what they thought went well, what didn't go so well, and what needed to be improved. And anything goes, like whatever opinion or thoughts you had get written down. And in that way, we're able to not only be able to say what we thought about the project, but improve future projects. And that has been a super big help for us.
You're saying that people can actually truly feel like the emotional safety component is present for people to be able to actually say, I totally didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. I didn't feel comfortable with it. Like there is the idea that trust is both a time saver, right? You waste a whole lot less time when you trust the people you're working with, but you also are given that space to probably be the most version of creative, right? And that you can actually collaborate with each other, which is what I have loved about working with you. And I think it's, again, EarthWork Collective for me is one of my mental models, by the way, of a great example of some of those dynamics. So I'm really grateful for that. Okay, so a couple other things, I just keep thinking of stuff. So the Carbon Almanac actually comes to mind a lot with some of the things you just described. I'm curious kind of learnings from that and how that kind of, in terms of this profile of this person, this agile, caring. I'm curious your learnings from what happened from the Carbon Almanac, which was a nonprofit, right? It's a nonprofit, to the current EarthWork Collective. I know you all are a group of people from that. What were the things about that inspired this new creation? I was curious, maybe particularly related to the characteristics that you saw in the other folks there. what things have come through that caused you to want to do this new thing?
I was very impressed by the generosity of the Carbon Almanac community and always wanting to make the work of others better. And that helps in creating your first shitty draft and knowing that it's okay, it's going to get better. And so developing that practice of trust in, yeah, I can do this, I'll try. And then you know that somebody out there has your back and is going to improve on it. Totally amazing. Like wanting to continue working this way has been a big drive in creating the collective.
At EarthWork, the project belongs to all of us. There isn't a person who gets all the glory for this project. It's everything that we are doing is to make EarthWork better so that we can stay together as a team, so that the work that we want to do will be put out into the world. And that I got from the Carbon Almanac, because whether we were working on the book or the children's book, the educator's guide, the podcast, it was every person in there pitched in where they could and how they could.
One more thing that I thought about just now is the idea of simplifying complex ideas. Like a lot of the topics addressed in the Carbon Almanac are not simple topics, but they were brought down to a level of almost anybody that can read the page can understand the main points of these topics. And we tried to do that at EarthWork Collective. We did a guide on ESG and on regeneration to try and take these big topics and distill them to their essence, like the simple ideas that drive these big topics. Here they are.
So what things you both just described kind of stand in contrast with a couple of things. I think one of them is that what this is not is information overload and information overwhelm, right? That is not what this collective is about, what this course is about, what this work is about. And the other thing that I noticed from what you just said is this idea that, like, so often I think in the workplace, this idea that I know you create an idea and you stake your claim. This is my territory, I created this. And one of the things I noticed in the Carbon Almanac, and I noticed on EarthWork, is it's actually you take something and it's built upon, like in structure versus layer and structure over one on top of the other. And it's not a territorial ownership based, like the territory concept is different in this. It wasn't mine, right? It's not just this, just from Seth or just from whoever. It's really all of ours. And I think it's a nice, and I think an EarthWork Collective to this idea that in everything, if you really were to just take a microscope on one specific part, it's actually all these different tiny pieces that have composed it, which is, how nature is and, how things are. And we're all composed of these different things. So I really appreciate that kind of specific part of it. Any other comments or questions regarding kind of like where you'd like to see things go next, or where do you maybe better, where do you see potential for change and growth in this? Where do you see, like, where are the flashing lights that's okay, the next thing, or what would be wonderful to focus on in the future? What's come up in terms of that?
The one thing is that our course is very broad. It's meant as an overview of the regenerative principles and how they can be applied to a small business, and helping a small business owner from any industry or field to be able to start to implement regenerative strategies. What we'd like to do is to dive deep into specific industry. For example, we know that fashion and agriculture are two that really, really need help to improve not only their impact on the planet, but also on people. We also want to dive deeper into the principles. So there are some ones that are tricky to implement, such as empowered participation. And so to have specific workshops and courses on how to bring this into your business.
Right. I'm usually an experiential educator. Like I lead the teaching through the experience. And I found that the online at first was like a block, like a challenge. It got too heady. So I've been playing with the idea of how to make that more hands-on for the person who's receiving the course. So I think in those workshops, we're going to be able to get to that hands-on piece and have the business owners apply it directly. So that's exciting.
And at this point, the course is more focused, it sounds to me, like on the profile of the entrepreneur who wants to do better, who wants to, you know, this idea of regeneration versus anybody from one specific industry.
That's
And I feel
right.
like that's, if you want to talk about healthcare, you know, my world I've been in for a long time, that's a very different story in terms of how do we be regenerative in a hospital, right? With medical devices and medical waste, and that's a whole different universe than they're talking about agriculture or fashion or anything, you know. That's something I would love to see too happen next, is kind of have that bit of a drill down in terms of industry. But it does sound like people who are entrepreneurs who have small scale businesses, who have these specific kind of levels of interest and curiosity and willingness to engage are the fit for the course.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, for joining us today. We really appreciate your very thoughtful questions and for taking our course and being able to give us feedback. We really appreciate that. We wish you all the best with your business and all of the endeavors that you have going. And we hope to talk again very soon in the future.
Yes, I hope to be back talking with you both soon too here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Merci.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks, bye.